Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everyone. I don't know how to whistle, or I would. There we go. All right, there we go. I'm glad everybody's having such a good time. We're going to get started now. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our webcast viewers. My name, once again, is Andrea Mandel-Campbell, and I'm pleased to be your host today. And viewers, thank you for joining us. We are proud of the speakers and audiences that we attract and are very thankful for the sponsors that support our events. At this time, I would like to acknowledge the generous support of today's sponsors: BLG, Bordner Ladner Gervais, represented by Philip Tardif; EY, represented by Eric Rawlinson; and Morneau Chappelle, represented by Joe Blomley. Thank you very much. I would also like to thank RBC, who has sponsored the participation of the youth and young leaders joining us this afternoon. Welcome and thank you for attending. I'd also like to remind everyone that there are Q&A cards on everyone's table. So this is your chance to ask these two gentlemen and two of our most important CEOs here in Canada the question that is the burning questions that you have that you'd like to ask them. So please fill those out, and we'll have volunteers from the Canadian Club passing through and picking those up. Now, let me introduce our speakers. David McKay is President and CEO of RBC. He's had a 31-year career at the bank, where he first started as a computer programmer. In recognition of his banking leadership, he was named Retail Banker of the Year in 2012 and 2015 by Retail Banker International. David is an active champion of Canadian innovation and has been a particular champion of transformational technologies like AI and blockchain. Al Monaco, who is also our guest today, joined Enbridge 24 years ago and has been President and Chief Executive Officer and Director of Enbridge for the last 9 years. Al serves as Director and member of the American Petroleum Institute's Finance and Executive Committees and is also a member of the National Petroleum Council. David and Al, I am pleased to pass the Canadian Club of Toronto podium over to you.
Well, thank you, Andrea, and good afternoon, everyone. And thanks to everyone for joining us for such an important conversation about Canada's energy future and a strategy and a path forward. And Al, thank you for coming all the way from Calgary to be with us today. We've talked about this offline. We always said if we ever got the chance to sit on stage together to tell this story, it's such a compelling story. So we really think this is an important conversation for Canada and for leaders, particularly in Toronto and the East, to have. So I'm going to set the context and put some themes out there. Then Al and I are going to have a dialogue about how do you build a strategy for energy for Canada. So we all sense it, I sense it, this growing frustration in Canada as we try to reconcile competing aspirations and competing ideas in our country. And we want to transition to a lower carbon footprint in Canada. We all aspire to that, to build a more sustainable environment, recognizing that climate change is one of our greatest challenges of our time. We also aspire to play a leading role in the greater challenge of our planet and a lower carbon footprint for the world. We also want and we aspire to Indigenous reconciliation and building a long-term partnership in our country. At the same time, we aspire to maintain this incredible quality of life that we've come to enjoy in Canada. Yet, in trying to achieve all of this, maintaining our tax revenues, balancing these aspirations, we have this incredible asset in Canada that we look as a binary outcome. If we're to harness these incredible resources in the West, it is not mutually inclusive of trying to achieve these objectives of climate change, carbon reduction, Indigenous reconciliation. And this binary outcome, I think, is wrong, and that there is a mutually inclusive path and strategy that Canada can take right in front of it that we don't seem to be able to get our heads around. And that's what we want to talk about today, to lay out this path, to put meat on the bones, as you like to say. When I go to Davos every year. I get a chance to see how the world looks at Canada. And certainly, it's humbling that we're a small country. Many times, the large countries look beyond us. But here's what global leaders, government and business leaders say about Canada. Canada's commitment to climate is admired, but not its execution. Our energy know-how is respected, but investment hasn't followed. We should be global leaders in energy transitions, but we aren't making an impact. So this frustration is growing in our country. We see it interprovincially at premiers' meetings. We see it between business and government. We see it within the levels of government that we can't find a path to go forward and leverage this incredible asset we have in front of us. And we have 7 million millennials who are looking at us as leaders in this room and saying, what are you doing? Like, you need to leave a sustainable planet behind. You need to provide the quality of life and the transition to a digital world. And we don't sense a plan. And one leader that I saw, a YouTube sensation that was at a lunch in Davos, said, our house is on fire. What are you doing? So I think the message is clear. There's this opportunity in front of us, but it requires a clear strategy. So first, a few themes that Al and I are going to talk about that are really important to put context around this discussion. First, the world is consuming more energy. Carbon emissions are rising. Increasing population growth, increasing aspirations of undeveloped worlds or developing worlds moving a greater proportion of their population into the middle class are going to consume energy, and they're not going to stop. Energy consumption, according to the IEA, will grow by 27% by 2040. We're on this path of growth. It's a reality. It fuels our world. We can't ignore that. Canada cutting back on its own won't impact other countries' aspirations and plans. And therefore, we have to recognize that we're on this journey, and we have to manage this journey in a very different way. 2, Canada has this incredible resource that can supply this growing need as we go through this transition. We have the 3rd largest reserves in the world behind is Venezuela and Saudi Arabia, but 99% of our exports are going to the United States. And we imported 1 million barrels a day of oil in 2017, 2/3 coming from the United States who don't ascribe to the Paris Accord and reducing global carbon footprints, and 1/3 from the Middle East. And this opportunity that we're missing is to use our oil to displace higher carbon fuels such as coal and other sources in these developing worlds as they grow their economy and their hunger for energy grows. We're missing this opportunity to actually contribute to carbon reduction in the world, and we haven't seized upon that. 3, energy is 10% of the Canadian GDP. 10% of our tax pays 10% of our healthcare system, and if we don't reinvest in this resource, it's going to diminish as a contribution to the quality of life that we enjoy today. And lastly, we have this path in front of us, this incredible resource to lever, with the right access to markets, which we struggle with the right investment, attracting the right investment, we can add another 1.1% to our annual GDP. That's the equivalent of creating a new auto sector in Canada right in front of us. The dividend to Canada is the reinvestment of those profits and that growth into technology, into a cleaner environment, into the transition. The second dividend is just under $200 billion over the next decade of government tax revenue. $200 billion. And we risk ceding that dividend to other leaders in the world, to other countries in the world, versus taking control of that dividend to transition our economy, to incent lower carbon world, to invest in clean technology. We risk ceding that dividend to others instead of taking control of it and building the world around us that we envision, and not letting others do that. So we must ensure that money is invested wisely. And we'll hear from Al. With the right investments, we can reduce carbon emissions from extraction by over 1/3 investing in clean technology. So that's the framework. That's the business hypothesis for the audience today, that we have this path under our control that achieves those objectives of Indigenous reconciliation, that achieves those objectives of helping the world reduce its carbon footprint, that allows us to make a transition in an economy that's a path in front of us that we can take. And Al, I'm looking forward to you putting some meat on those bones and walking through it. So, first question. We'll start with a macro and we'll go through the choices we make
Before
today.
you start,
Yeah.
thank you very much for having us here. It's great when leaders like yourself speak out. I can be out here every day talking to people, but having you and others like you really makes a difference. Just for people's context here, we are probably the largest energy infrastructure player in North America. Well, we are, and of course, probably globally as well. The reason I'm telling you that is not because I want to boast about the size of our company, but it's because we have a perspective that includes just about every state in the United States. We operate in all the provinces, and we tend to look at the picture from the fundamentals of supply and demand from a North American perspective. So we have, that's a little bit unique relative to some companies that are focused solely in Canada. So I just want to make sure your audience had that context.
That's great.
Yep.
Perfect context. So we're making choices today on all these issues that are going to have long-term impact. So how optimistic are you about Canada's energy future and our ability to play the leading role that I talked about in the global strategy?
Was this the easy one you were going to
Yeah, we're going to warm you up with
Okay. Well, I guess maybe, David, it's probably a tale of two stories. Time zero today, I have to say that I think we're probably, and I think you're alluding to this, we're squandering an opportunity here to really drive our economy and supply energy in the most sustainable way. And you just have to look at the facts here. It's not me. You can look any of this up. If you look at pure investment, whether it's direct investment in energy, whether it's the value of equities, and you've seen a bunch of international players exit. And the reason for all of that is there's uncertainty about our environment, our investment climate, whether it's tax and regulatory issues, whether it's the lack of infrastructure, and any other business would be focused entirely on making sure it had transportation conduits to its markets. Commodities are no different, so we have trouble there. So I would say today, from an investment climate point of view, we're probably in a trough. We're not in the best position. But I am optimistic for the future. If we were sitting here 10 years from now, looking back, I think, and the way I look at it is, what's the strategy and what's the competitive advantage that we have as a company, but as a country? When you look through it, number one, massively abundant resources. We're blessed with resources that just about nobody else has. We can find and develop these resources at extremely low cost. We have Canadian champions out there, not massive companies, but mid-sized companies who are finding oil and gas and energy generally better and faster than anybody else, including the United States. So great advantages there. We've got proximity to markets. Everybody thinks about the West Coast and Asia. That's true. China, I think, is probably coming down a little bit in growth in the next 5 to 10 years, but India is the next big one. We have proximity to that market. The East Coast is the same thing. What people miss, though, is that, yes, we have a big market in the U.S. that we need to diversify from, but they also have a gateway to the export markets through the Gulf Coast, which we have access to. So I think all of that bodes extremely well. We have great capital markets, well developed to attract capital when things are working well, and hopefully we get back to that. We have great skills. We have the number 1 or number 2 regulatory environment in the world, just about second, probably only to Norway. But this is something that needs to be harnessed, needs to be recognized. We've got all these pieces. We've got to put them together so we can actually develop an energy strategy here that utilizes this great competitive advantage we have. Mm-hmm. And to me, it's about how can we gain global market share of energy with this advantage that we have.
Mm-hmm. So we, part of the reason we're struggling, and we'll move to an even more difficult question here for you, is climate change. And our view as a country, particularly through the media's eyes, is this is a binary outcome. Like, how can you develop your resources, emit carbon from that extraction and transportation, and still meet the aspirations? So can you talk about some of the great work coming out and how you think about the energy sector and can it compete globally and better approach these climate change issues? So this is a mutually inclusive strategy, not a binary outcome.
This is tougher.
Yeah.
And maybe it takes a little bit more background, if I could, just for a moment. So there's some, what would I call them, inconvenient truths about the realities of energy in today's market. So let me just capture a couple things. First of all, I think you alluded to this. Demand for energy is going up. There's simply not much doubt about that. Why is that? I think everybody will tell you population is going to go from 7.6 to 9 billion people. That takes more energy. You're going to have more urbanization. 55% of the people live in big cities today. It's going to 68% by 2040 or 50. The biggest one, I think, is the increases in standard of living that are going to happen and that everybody wants for themselves around the world, which we have enjoyed for many, many decades. Let me just throw a couple numbers out. The average use of energy in the globe today, if you convert all the energy we use into barrels, the average use is 34 barrels per year. 1.5 billion people have access to that 34 barrels. There's another 2.5 that use 14 barrels. There's another 2.5 that use 4 barrels. And there's 1 billion people that use 1 barrel per year. Why am I telling you that? It's because the standard of living is going to require more energy use. All those people around the world in that bottom 3/4 that I talked about are going to want to increase their standard of living, and we should respect that. So I think that's really the issue on the demand side. We shouldn't forget, though, that our industry has made tremendous progress. If you look at GDP growth, for example, it's stayed pretty much even with energy growth over the last 3 or 4 decades. In the future, GDP, you can tell me, will grow, what, 3.5% or 3 somewhere
3.5 globally, yeah.
Energy will increase by 1%. So you're disconnected now from GDP. That's great because you've got lower energy intensity. So the bottom line of all of that, we are going to need all sources of supply. We're going to need lots of renewables. We're going to need a lot more natural gas because the fact is that is extremely energy efficient from an emissions perspective. We're going to need lots of crude oil. All of this is a reality to satisfy this demand. So now we connect that back to emissions. The reality is Canada produces about 1.6% of emissions globally. We have done a tremendous job in this country that we should be really proud of. We basically have gotten off all of coal. I think the rest is coming off by 2030. We've added somewhere in the order of 20,000 megawatts of renewable energy. We are doing a great job. We reduced energy intensity in this country by 25%. So these are the things that connect together. I think to get to your question now, with that background, we have to really do 2 things. Number one, I think we have to open up the opportunity set to how we reduce emissions. I think most people say, well, of course, you have to eliminate energy production. Well, we just found out that's not going to work because we need to produce energy. And if we don't produce it, somebody else will. So I think that's the first thing. Angles of attack to reduce energy emissions, not just at the production end, at the consumption end, through new technology, greater use of natural gas. For example, the United States reduced its natural gas emissions to below, or total emissions to below 1992 levels. How did they do that? Anybody take a guess? Thank you. Close coal plants and use natural gas. If you're really concerned about reducing global emissions, natural gas is the best way to do that, for sure.
So is Canada getting enough credit if we export more natural gas in our emissions? Because it shouldn't be your total production amount. It should be how much are you saving? This is a global pie that we have to negotiate, not our share of the pie. So how do we make sure that if we can reduce coal plants in China, Malaysia, Indonesia, India, we get appropriate credit for that.
So that's a great question. So in Canada, we tend to look at emissions on a national basis. How do we meet Paris? How do we reduce our emissions in Canada? Which are all good questions. But the reality is, we all know emissions are not a Canadian issue. They are a global issue. Again, if you really want to reduce emissions globally, one way to do that is to focus on more natural gas from Canada. Go back to what we said earlier about the competitive advantage. We have massive natural gas reserves that are found at extremely low cost. An LNG plant, for example, on the west coast of Canada, that's electrically driven, is enough to offset global emissions from 20 coal plants. Now, we tend to look at that in Canada and say, well, LNG plant, that's going to raise our emissions. Yes, it will. But what will it do to global emissions?
The credit we should
They
get.
come down. So it's this crediting concept that I think we need to think about in our strategy around emissions and energy in this country.
I interrupted you. You were going to build on some of the technology to reduce emissions and your reinvestments. And can we really get that 1/3 dividend in reducing extraction emissions?
I have no doubt. I mean, if you look at the way I think about how to apply technology in energy is I look at the value chain. So let's look at the front end of the value chain, people that develop and produce resources. If you look at the facts, and I'll put solar and wind in there too. Solar and wind costs have come down, let's see, wind by 35%. Wind has come down by 90% in its cost. The energy business in Canada has reduced its own intensity by 21% just over the last decade. So this stuff is happening, and the biggest companies are investing a lot of capital to actually reduce emissions. So the average unit of production coming out of Canada today, if you look at oil specifically as an example, is actually below the average of the North American barrel. We look at ourselves today and say, well, we have the most emissions than any other industry in the world right here in Canada, and that's not true anymore. So there's a number of things on the production side that are being done. There's a number of investment funds now and collaboration with industry that they're putting their technologies together. COSIA is a great example of one. And when have you ever seen large integrated companies come together to collaborate? They're usually competing hard. But when it comes to emissions and reduction and technology, they're all in to helping us get there. The one thing that's really changed, I think, is the energy industry gets sustainability. They're on this page, and they want to move it forward. That's probably a big change compared to what we've seen. On the consumption end, you know, if you look at vehicle emission standards, building codes, Energy Star program, all of these things have done a great job of making an impact. In fact, I think the numbers are, if we hadn't made these efforts, our emissions and energy use would be 55%. With them, they're 31%. So I think we have to realize that we are making progress, but there's another big angle of attack, the consumption end. Just a minute on how we look at technology in our business, because I'll bet you everybody thinks pipeline companies and technology, that doesn't work. The biggest area where we can make an impact, if you visualize the map of North America, and we've got thousands of miles of pipeline. We use technology today that will inspect underground, where these pipelines lie, every inch of the pipeline in all of our systems. Every inch, millimeter by millimeter, like an MRI that you would go to your doctor for. We mine this data, and this is like billions of pieces of information, and we use algorithms to help us identify where the hot spots are. That's on the integrity management side. We spent $1.2 billion on power last year alone to move product. If we can make just small changes to how we schedule our business, how we utilize our power, we can have a big impact on emissions and obviously add value to the bottom line too. So big opportunities here. Renewables is another one where we have had a big effect. I mean, looking at wind data, for example, for the last 20, 30 years in a particular region. How does that help us identify how to properly position a turbine so you get maximum performance from the blades? So I think it used to be that people thought, well, the energy space doesn't use technology, but it's being used in a very big way today. And I think we should be proud of it as a country.
We should be, yet we have this huge branding problem inside our own country, outside that somehow it's dirty energy. But the outcomes you just described and where we are is clearly this is advanced technology, this is cleaner energy, everyone thinks. So we have a branding problem on the extraction side and the labeling, but we also have a branding problem in the safety of transportation. And were you surprised that, given with the recent train derailment out west and some of the challenges we've had, that so little debate, what happens if all those trains had been carrying oil, and why are we so adverse to putting that technology underground? We struggle with it as a country.
I think the reality is, David, I mean, it's a great point, and believe me, I wonder about that question a lot every time I see issues that arise out there. We tend, as an industry, not to highlight the incidents so much related to rail. I think we'd all agree that pipelines are certainly the most safest way to transport energy. And the one thing that I think has happened in our industry, though, years ago, and in all industries, we tend to say, you know what, we run industrial systems, and once in a while, things happen. I think today, the way we approach this issue is that none of that is acceptable. We start from the premise that everything's preventable. We put a lot of capital to make sure that we are preventing incidents so that our people have this we call path to zero. So rather than accepting that things happen, we go out of our way to make sure that we are trying to prevent things from happening in the field. And the reason why this is so important is because we are ultimately not in the commodity business. We're in the trust business. If something happens in the field, if we spill 10 barrels of crude, it's going to be a headline. And I'm not worried about the headline per se, but communities need to trust what we are doing. And I think that's the biggest change in our company and our industry, is focusing on how communities look at things. And sorry to carry on here, one more point on this, is that we used to think of our business as a commodity business. Everybody needs commodities, right? So we'll just move them and somebody will take them. We now look at it differently. We are in the consumer business, and the consumers actually have spoken. What they say is, yes, we want it reliably. We want that energy safely. We want it at the very lowest cost possible. We also want it done sustainably. So the industry, I believe, is now cottoned on to that. We tend to look at what we do as ultimately a consumer-driven business because you can't look at it as a commodity.
So the perception among Canadians is developing our resources and creating greater access to market, which we absolutely need to prosper in the future, is not reconcilable with Indigenous reconciliation, if I use that word twice. And yet you've shown through your leadership and at Enbridge that it very much is a path to an inclusive investment culture and true Indigenous reconciliation and partnership. So how do we break that paradigm? And maybe you can talk about that.
Sure. I'm glad you asked that, actually, David, because the whole issue of Indigenous reconciliation and how it connects with energy is something that really excites me, excites our company a lot. And we've had some tough lessons over the years, but actually decades. If you look at our company, we engage with over 200 Indigenous groups across North America. So we've learned a few things along the way. And I would say the number one thing that we've learned is don't start with economics when you're engaging an Indigenous group. Don't tell them this is good for them because it's economic and it will create jobs. What you need to do, at least, and this is how we go through this with our own people in the discussions we have, is we got to start by building the trust over a period of time. And this is not a 4-month exercise where you're going in to build a project and you need to engage with First Nations. This is a 40-year relationship. So you build trust over a very long period of time. And you do that primarily at the front end by really understanding what they do. So you need to understand their connection to the water and the land. You need to understand their governance processes so that you can actually listen carefully to what they're saying. And we always hear about this notion around consultation. And we have this debate internally, and we tell our people, look, it's not just about having a conversation. It's about actually acting upon what you're hearing. So at the end of the project consultation, we'll usually ask our people, so what changed in the project? And if the answer is not much, then you can guarantee you haven't listened carefully. And in most instances, what we find when we engage Indigenous groups is they have excellent expertise when it comes to issues around the environment, water, land, and so forth, that we actually try and build into our project. So we respond to their concerns. And to me, that's the big test of whether it can work. So really, this is a big opportunity. Once you've built that trust, then you can go on to the economic discussion, because alignment economically helps. And it's not always the same. Sometimes it's just capacity agreements where you're helping them engage and helping them fund that. A lot of times it's adapting your supply chain. So if we really want Indigenous participation in a project, it involves training, it involves providing them with access to opportunities. And so that's a big part of what we do. And in some cases, we have equity ownership. So a good example, the east-west tie line, transmission line, that runs from Wawa to Thunder Bay, coming up here to construction. At the end of that project, we're going to have a 20% ownership partner with First Nations and Métis groups. On Line 3 in Canada, we had 1,000 workers on the job who generated somewhere in the order of $300 million in revenue for themselves, and they were great partners in executing that project. So, as I said, you can tell I'm excited about how we can use energy, which we think we're at the forefront at with First Nations and Métis, to really help reconciliation in Canada.
Mm-hmm. And I think we're starting to see that model really take off, and that true partnership and shared ownership is important, as you said. I got a number of questions here and some themes, so maybe because they overlap, I'll paraphrase, but there's frustration around regulation and approval processes and how we regulate the industry. No specific one, but can we talk about why we've struggled with the regulation and program investment approval? We've scared away a lot of capital out of this country because of that. How do we, what's missing? Like why are we struggling with this clear economic dividend, with this clear need in front of us? Why are we struggling to get things approved?
Well, I think you're right, we're struggling. And if you go back, though, over the decades and even to today, I think we've done a pretty good job of looking at project-specific reviews from a purely, let's call it, scientific perspective. I think the issue is that, as you've seen lately, some of the problems around energy policy, climate policy, and Indigenous policy are trying to be ferreted out within the project review. So my view on this, David, is we need to step back and take those issues out of the project review equation. We need to have a strong energy policy in this country. We need to have a strong climate policy, and we need to have Indigenous reconciliation. Those need to be at the policy or umbrella level. Once those are set and we know the rules as investors, then we can say, all right, I got the game plan. Mm-hmm. Now here's how I can build a project within that context. I think right now those two are mushed together, and I think that's how we see the problem.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So with the journey that we're on, the financial community seems to be less and less on the same path. Do you think the financial community has started to abandon the industry as far as helping direct capital and direct financing? And what's it
I'm
going
going
to
to
take?
turn that question around
Yeah.
to you.
How does it feel from your end? And I'll tell you how it feels from our end.
You know, actually, from our end, it's felt pretty good, but things have changed. So,
Yeah.
you know, if I go back over 10 years, we've probably put $80 billion of capital into the ground. So we are big consumers of capital, and you know, we raise capital from all the different constituencies, banks and equity investors and the like. So I think we've been pretty successful at doing it on a relatively low-cost basis. Over the last 3 years, I think the world has changed. I think you're experiencing it. There's a lot more scrutiny on what energy companies are doing. So we have spent a lot of time internally and in face-to-face, on-the-ground meetings with all of our capital providers. And the basic issue is, and concern that they have, is how do we perform on an ESG basis? So we take them through all the things we're doing around the targets we set, how we engage with communities, and most importantly, the criteria we use when we make an investment to invest on ESG variables. So we take them through all of the screening that we go through and try to get them comfortable with the approach we take. And I would say, you know, without being too statistical about it, I guess, is probably 90-95% of the time they get it. And what they want to see is that we're focused on it, that we're transparent, that we have the right standards, and that we have the right social approach to what we're doing. So I think it's an issue, but it's one that we're managing only because I think we've got the issue nailed as to what they're really looking for. They're not looking necessarily to divest or not invest. There's some of that.
There's a few.
They're really trying to differentiate between companies.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But they're certainly willing to put more capital down the table for the right journey and the right partner.
And I think it's because of those fundamentals we talked about.
Exactly,
right?
who can make that inclusive strategy and that inclusive vision forward rather than exclusively about profit. So
Exactly. Yeah.
I think, and there's the odd one who has decided not to pursue kind of the bank lending market, but generally it's pretty small.
We weren't very happy with those.
No. But I think a lot of your Canadian partners stepped up, right?
They did.
Including
Thank
RBC. So
Does that mean you'll continue to do that?
absolutely. I wouldn't be on the stage here today if I wasn't going to do that.
Down.
And we've passionately believe, as in my opening, that this is an asset that Canada has to leverage for the journey that we need to take as a country to transition our economy, to transition our country, to enjoy the quality of life that we have. This is a journey that's in front of us. There's so many things in our world that we don't have control of, but when you have control of a pathway to leverage an asset and to grow your country and do all the things that we want to do as leaders in this world, it's hard to look away. And I share that frustration to say, why can't we jump in and take this journey together? We have this branding challenge.
Your
We have
point
this
about
branding challenge in Toronto. We have this branding. This was why we're on stage today in Ottawa. How do we bust through the brand challenge?
your point about the journey is a real good one. I'll tell you, I'm just going to share my frustration as a Canadian, in that it feels like we're not proud of our energy industry. It feels like this is something we tolerate and would rather not discuss, rather than saying we've got the skills, we've got this great resources, we do it better than anybody else. Let's think about one example, if I can just indulge one more minute.
Yeah. I think we got 5.
Okay, let's just say that we decided that in Canada we wanted to eliminate any future development of energy. Given what we said earlier about demand and supply globally, what would happen? Well, I think what would happen is this. There's 6 major producers in the world, one of which is us, on energy. We take ourselves out of that equation, somebody else is going to step up. And it's going to be one of Russia, Saudi Arabia, or Iran, and maybe a couple of others in there. But you get the picture. So is that really what we want to do when we are the most efficient, lowest energy intensity, best environmental record globally for making resources happen? If that happens, we're giving up the opportunity, the economic opportunity, and we're allowing a higher emission intensity form of production. That's not what we want to do, in my opinion.
Technology. We can circle back one more time because there's so many exciting things, examples of reinvesting the dividend from capital flow, from profits, from government taxation dividends back into research and development. What are some of the exciting things that you're seeing coming down the pipeline so we can talk about this is real, that you need capital to innovate and you need profits, and the future looks really bright if we can continue to do this, but not if we don't get the investment. Like, what are you seeing? Can you leave us with a couple of things?
The closest thing to us in our space that we see every day, and people probably don't appreciate, is that we have these Canadian champions, as I referred to earlier. I'll give you one example. Mid-size oil and gas company, we used to drill on acreage, thousands of acres. We'd poke wells all over the place. Technology has led us to the ability to drill 40 wells from one small pad because of horizontal capability and so forth. Imagine the environmental footprint reduction there. Imagine the emissions reduction. The entire supply chain is more efficient because of that. I would say the other major one close to us is in the Canadian champion category. Look at Suncor. Look at Imperial Oil. The amount of investment they're making in technology to actually reduce energy intensity is amazing. And this tells you that in our country we have great leadership in the energy space that wants to put dollars to work in reducing emissions.
I hope you've heard the message today that this path that's in front of us can achieve the objectives as a country we've set for ourselves, that we can have a greater impact on the global carbon footprint by investing in our resources and taking control of this asset in front of us and using that dividend, that corporate dividend, that government tax dividend to make a difference. I hope you've heard the pride that we should have in the industry that manages this. It's a big part of our economy. It's 10%. We tend to ignore the contribution, all the transfer payments that come out of Alberta because of that. If we don't nurture this investment, not only will we not move ahead and seize the opportunity, we'll retreat from this and we won't have the cash flow to pay for the programs we've come to enjoy. And we've all seen how much our governments love to spend money. So we need to protect this industry. You've made a compelling case that there is a path to true, meaningful Indigenous reconciliation and partnership, and economic partnership, and holistic partnership around building with our communities. And you've shown us that our carbon agenda, which is critical to our generation and the next generation, is better facilitated by understanding the world around us, trying to meet that demand, and reinvesting in the future, than retreating from this and reducing our own carbon footprint, but not really making any meaningful difference in the overall problem that we struggle with as a country. So I want to thank everybody for coming to hear the story today. You're an important audience for us to talk to, and I hope you take away these messages and you debate them, because we need to stand up as business leaders to tell this story. It's really important because our governments will not move forward. They need the support of the business community to take the political risk to move forward with this agenda. So Al, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, leadership.
Well, I think that was really a terrific conversation. I'm Andrew Graham. I'm the president of the Canadian Club of Toronto for this year, and just so excited that we're able to host such an interesting discussion. We are fortunate to often have CEOs come and speak at our podium. I can't remember the last time we've ever had a CEO interview another CEO. And I think the great news is, Mr. McKay, you've won a lot of awards. We know you as a great banking executive. It turns out you're actually a great interviewer. So we do have some more events coming up in the next few weeks. I don't know how your lunch hours look, but we would love to have you back in this role. In all seriousness, thanks to you both. Thank you, Mr. McKay, for talking about the disconnect that exists in the world and what you heard at Davos, and how big of an opportunity we have as we sort of seize our future, seize our energy future. And Mr. Monaco, great to be reminded of the strength and the opportunity that we have in this in this industry and with the resources that we have. So thanks to you both for bringing this message to this audience. I think the only regret I have is that I know there were a lot of questions that came from the audience that we couldn't get to. I think we could have gone on for about twice as long. I heard from many people before the event today that this is really a conversation that we needed to have, and especially in Toronto today. So thank you very much to both of you. Excuse me 1 second. Just give me 1 second. Okay, sure. Just before we conclude, I'll tell you about a couple of upcoming events. First of all, on Monday, March 4th, we'll ask the question, is your company safe? As we host a dynamic panel on shareholder activism, featuring Ben Axler from Spruce Point Capital in New York. And the following day, on March 5th, we'll have our second annual Power of Networking event at LinkedIn. The focus this year is on women and their networking challenges and solutions. As we look at networking, especially in the context of LinkedIn and other technologies. So those are two great events. We hope you can join us for both of those. Just before we conclude, I'd like to extend another round of thanks to our sponsors for today, BLG, EY, and Morneau Chappelle. Thank you. And thanks, as always, to MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, VVC for live streaming today's event, and to all of you for attending. Thank you. I hope we get to see you all again soon.